How is it possible that a team like Ferrari, with all its history and resources, continues to make such basic mistakes that they ruin all weekends of its star pilots? What Lewis Hamilton revealed after Monaco GP is not simply one more complaint. It is a blunt message that completely disarms the image of progress that Ferrari wants to project. Hamilton arrived in Monaco at a key moment of its adaptation to the SF25, a car that has shown to have a real potential, but also an operational complexity that requires absolute rapport between pilot and equipment. The 7-time world champion had shown flashes of brilliance in the previous races, particularly in the classification of the GP of China, where he touched perfection in a return to the limit. However, these positive signals mixed with a persistent feeling that the gear still did not fit at all. In Ferrari, they knew that Monaco, a circuit where the pilot's talent can make differences that engineering cannot compensate, was the ideal scenario for Hamilton to demonstrate its evolution within the team. And during Saturday's classification, everything seemed to be headed for a positive day. In a circuit where precision is everything, Hamilton executed a solid lap that placed it in the 4th position. A clear sample that, beyond statistics, its level remained elite. But that illusion faded completely in seconds due to a communication error as basic as devastating. In full Q1, while the pilot sailed in infernal traffic in the narrow streets of the Principality, Hamilton received a confusing indication of his track engineer about Max Verstappen's position. According to the pilot himself, the visual signals in his monitor changed erratically, and what should be a simple courtesy maneuver ended up becoming an involuntary obstruction. In a sport where decisions should be made in second fractions, these types of ambiguities are lethal. The consequence was immediate, a penalty of 3 positions that relegated it from the 4th to the 7th place on the grill. And in Monaco, that is equivalent to having a real podium opportunity to face a mere survival career. It is one of the few circuits in which the output position has a direct and almost irreversible impact on the final result. Any hope of progressing on the track evaporated between walls, slow curves, and a car train impossible to overcome. These types of incidents are the ones that most frustrate a pilot like Hamilton. Not because of the penalty itself, but because it represents the manifestation of a structural weakness within the team. Communication between pilot and engineer is the central nervous system of any career strategy. If that link fails, everything else staggers. In an environment where every second counts, the inability to correctly manage critical information transforms good individual performance into a collective defeat. And the most disturbing thing is that it is not an isolated event. Ferrari already dragged similar background from previous seasons. Although the arrival of Frédéric Vasseur had brought promises of renewal and professionalism, the reality is that echoes of chronic disorganization that has defined the Scuderia still persist in the last decade. Hamilton's case in Monaco is simply the most recent chapter of a story that Ferrari has failed to rewrite. The atmosphere within the team, despite the evident professionalism, began to die of some tension. Because when a pilot such as Hamilton, with his history and experience, he begins to raise his voice in a measured but firm way, it is because he sees a background problem. One that goes beyond the car or circuit. One that threatens to repeat itself if deep and urgent measures are not taken. What happened after the checkered flag in the 2025 Monaco GP was more than a statement when passing. It was a testimony of how even a team with resources, human talent, and Ferrari's story can auto-boycott its own success. When Lewis Hamilton got out of the car and talked to the media, he did not turn to the overflowing emotion or a simplistic criticism. His message was surgical, almost clinical. As if each word were designed to reveal the internal functioning of a team that, despite its facade of excellence, still operates with inadmissible base errors in Formula One modern. Hamilton explained precisely the exact moment in which everything collapsed, during the classification. A session where the minimum margin of error cannot be allowed. There, the pilot received a series of contradictory instructions from his track engineer regarding the Max Verstappen position. In the heat of a quick lap in Monaco, a circuit where the margins of error are measured in millimeters, the confusion was fatal. The British pilot turned away, accelerated again, and in that process he involuntarily blocked Verstappen. The result was a penalty of 3 grid positions. Not due to a lack of talent or excessive aggressiveness, but for erroneous information from the wall. This isolated fact, which in other teams could be understood as a rarity, in Ferrari acquires a much more worrying dimension. Because it is not the first time something like this happens. And Hamilton knows. The frustration of his subsequent statement did not point only to what happened in Monaco, but to an accumulation of signals that reveal a pattern. The lack of synchronization between pilot and wall. The absence of protocols that allow confirming critical information in real time. And, above all, the internal culture that allows these errors to be repeated without apparent consequences. The implicit message in Hamilton's statement was devastating. It is not enough to have a competitive car if there is no operational structure that knows how to execute it. You can have the best aerodynamic package, the most efficient engine, even the most experienced pilot of the grill. But if strategic decisions fail, all that talent becomes wasted potential. Ferrari lived it in his own flesh in Monaco, and Hamilton did not hesitate to point it out. In addition, there is a detail that very few have analyzed in depth. Ferrari had opted for a hybrid strategy for Monaco. Instead of risking with a totally new package, they opted for a combination between components of the current season and successful elements of the past, such as the rear wing of maximum load used in 2024. Logic was solid. Maximize traction and stability in a layout where each curve is a sentence. But that technical coherence faded completely when the human factor, the most basic, failed. And Hamilton made it clear, you can have the ideal car, but if the communication between the wall and the cockpit is poor, you are convicted. The consequences of the 2025 Monaco GP for Ferrari are not limited to a simple frustration in the result or a penalty in the classification. They are much deeper, more structural, and extend as a silent warning that can have ramifications throughout the season and, even more important, in the stability of the project that the team is building around Lewis Hamilton. Because what happened was not simply a mistake, it was a revelation. Ferrari's internal system, even in its new era of modernization, is still plagued by operational deficiencies at times of maximum pressure. When a pilot like Hamilton publicly exposes the failures of the team, it does not do so from the impulse or the rage. He does it as part of a change strategy. Because if something has demonstrated throughout his career, he understands as few the internal psychology of a Formula Team 1. His criticism, disguised as rational analysis, points directly to Ferrari's heart. The inability to guarantee an impeccable execution under pressure. And that, in a sport where every millisecond and each decision tell, is a sentence of mediocrity if it is not corrected in time. These types of situations also have a direct impact on the moral and internal cohesion of the team. When a pilot of his caliber loses a clear opportunity to add important points due to others' errors, wherein trust occurs, the pilot begins to doubt the information he receives. Engineers feel pressured by public scrutiny. And leadership, in this case by Frederick Vasseur, is forced to act quickly to prevent the narrative from becoming toxic. But there is more. This incident has reopened a wound that in Maranello tries to close year after year without success. The perception that Ferrari has resources and talent, but not the operational culture necessary to support a winning campaign. It is not only fast cars or good pilots. Modern Formula One rewards surgical precision in each area, from the wall to real-time data, from boxing stops to decisions under yellow flag. And this is where Ferrari is still lagging with its main rivals. While McLaren operates with an almost military synchronization, and Red Bull has perfected the art of strategic execution, Ferrari continues to fight to establish a system that minimizes human errors in critical situations. And this is not just a technical problem. It is a cultural issue. It is the difference between a team that responds proactively to the career stress and another that reacts late when the damage is already done. In sports, this type of failure has an immediate impact. Ferrari cannot afford to give offs on the grill, especially in a championship where each point counts. Hamilton, who is already in a stage of his career in which there is no room for long-term projects without concrete results, knows it better than anyone. Therefore, his reaction in Monaco was not only that of a frustrated pilot, but that of a leader who demands an urgent change. If Ferrari fails to correct these failures in the short term, it runs the risk that the confidence that Hamilton has deposited in this project is irremediably erosion. And that would not only affect its individual performance, but also the complete environment of the team. The loss of internal credibility is a silent threat that can sabotage any structure, however solid it seems from the outside. The 2025 Monaco race will go down in history not because of spectacular overtaking or a memorable battle on the track, but for what happened when the traffic light had already turned off and the checkered flag had fallen. What really marked this Grand Prix was the moment in which Lewis Hamilton, with a serenity that only the years of experience at the highest level, undressed Ferrari's strategic deficiencies. He did not shout, he did not blame directly, he did not seek to generate empty controversy. He simply explained, with precision of surgeon, how an internal communication failure ruined a race that could have been decisive for the course of the season. What he said was not just a technical criticism. It was a warning that resonates strongly in Maranello's halls. Because when someone with Hamilton's authority launches such a reflection, He does not do it by passing frustration. He does it because he sees a pattern that threatens to repeat himself. And that pattern, if it does not break, can become the greatest obstacle to a team that on paper has everything to win, but that in practice continues to stumble upon the same errors of always. At this stage of his career, Hamilton is not in Ferrari for nostalgia or reputation. He is because he saw in this team a project to which he could contribute experience, winning mentality, and above all, internal pressure to be professional once and for all. But that transformation does not happen spontaneously. It requires difficult decisions, structural changes, and a deep review of the processes that, race after career, are still showing fragile under pressure. And if someone can catalyze that change, it's him. Ferrari, meanwhile, now has a crossroads in front of him. It can minimize what happened in Monaco, cross out of isolated error, and move on as if nothing had happened. Or you can assume that these types of failures are no longer acceptable if you really want to compete for championships. The difference between a large team and a champion team lies precisely in that, how they react to their own mistakes, and whether they understand them as anomalies or as symptoms of a major problem. What Hamilton left on the table was not just a complaint. It was a declaration of intentions, a standard requirement, a sample that, for him, dressing Ferrari red is not an empty symbol, but a responsibility that deserves to be honored with excellence, not with improvisation. And if in Maranello they are not ready to operate under that level of demand, then the association between pilot and team will be sentenced to the same destination as so many other failed projects that promised glory and only delivered frustration. This Monaco GP was in many ways a turning point. One of those races that, seen in retrospective, marked the beginning of a change or the beginning of the end. And that is why, beyond the result on the track, what really matters is what is done with the truth that Hamilton exposed.